All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the June 2021 edition of our monthly webinar series. This is actually the last one for 2021. We're taking a little break. Well, not the calendar year, the academic year. We're taking a little break for July and August. So welcome to all of you who made it here on June 30th. My name is Chris Pankowich. I'm the Research and Knowledge Lead here at the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health. And I welcome all of you in attendance today to share this space with us as we shine a light on our international students and those who work to support them. As many of us know, our international student populations have been rapidly increasing in recent years, both from our larger urban centers to more of our rural communities. International students come here with all of their academics, hopes, and dreams, as well as many pressures and fears. And adjusting to life as an international student is not always easy. Navigating in a new country can add extra stress to the academic and lifestyle adjustments that can affect anyone's transition to post-secondary education. When you add in all of the disruption and uncertainty for our international students over the pandemic, it is not surprising to hear that many of them have been struggling with mental health challenges now more than ever. So further to this point, here at the CMH, we started wondering, what has it been like to be tasked in a role where we need to support and nurture the international student experience? What is it generally like to walk a day in the life of this role? How has it been impacted amidst the rapidly increasing international student populations? What about during the pandemic? And finally, how do we envision this role growing and transforming amidst strategies to internationalize our campuses? Fortunately, we are joined here today by a couple of our campus community members who can help provide some much needed perspective and shed some light on this topic. Before I do introduce our guest for today, I have a couple of housekeeping notes. We will be primarily fielding our audience questions at the end of the webinar. I'd like to draw your attention to the bottom of your screens, and you'll see a Q&A feature as well as a chat feature. Please use the Q&A feature to submit any questions for our panelists today. I will be actively tracking these questions throughout the webinar, and if the opportunity does arise to bring a question to the attention of our presenters prior to the end of the webinar, I'll try my best to do so. For any other inquiries or comments, please use the chat feature. We encourage all of you to use this chat function to connect with each other and share thoughts and perspectives as the webinar is occurring. And finally, a brief follow-up survey will be presented to you or sent to you via email after the session. It will be greatly appreciated if you could take a few moments to fill that out. As for our guests today, I have two very esteemed members of our campus community on hand. The first, Tenzing Kunga, is the Manager of Student Integration and Support at George Brown College. He joined the International Center Division at the college in 2013 and has spent the past 7 years working closely with international students as an international student advisor. Tenzing immigrated to Canada in 2006, having previously lived in Nepal and India. He also completed his post-secondary education at George Brown College. We also are joined by Lynne Marie Farley, and she is the Senior Manager of International Student Support and Engagement at Ryerson University. She also is a former international student from Barbados who completed her undergraduate and master's degrees at the University of Guelph. Her journey in student affairs began as a student leader at Guelph, and from there went on to student support roles at the University of Waterloo and Wilfrid Laurier University. In terms of our desired outcomes for today, really we're trying to focus on a few things here, and a lot of it has to do with gaining a deeper understanding of the international student experience, and this is both during and prior to the pandemic occurring. The second is to understand what it can be really like to walk in the shoes of someone who works to support international students, specifically from the perspective of those in an international student support department, again, prior to and during the pandemic and moving forward. The third outcome we're hoping to take away is like, what are the big lessons we could learn from what's happened over the past 15 months? Much like with other areas of our society and our culture, the pandemic has made a lot of things more salient that were kind of in existence prior to the pandemic. And further to that, we want to then remind ourselves that we had a lot of work to do and areas of focus prior to the pandemic happening that are now starting to come back into focus. And the last piece of this webinar is going to focus on campus internationalization strategies. What exactly does that mean? What does that look like for the people that are working in these areas? And what is the hope or the outcome that these strategies are going to achieve? With that being said, let's dive in to our first topic. The international student experience. As someone who has worked on a campus environment in an administrative capacity, then later working as a faculty member in a program where there was a large proportion of international students, I'll be the first to admit that I've had a lot of blind spots. I've been very focused on, delivering the classroom experience, delivering the content, and oftentimes not thinking about what the unique challenges were to many of these international students I was working with in the classroom. So I was hoping we could take a few moments to start by painting a picture, both from your own personal experiences and your current work experiences, of what it's like to be an international student at a post-secondary institution in Ontario. I'll pass it to, I don't know, Tenzing. Why don't you lead us
Yep.
off? Share a little bit about walking a mile in those shoes for our audience.
Sure. Thank you, Chris, for inviting me to the panel, and welcome to all the attendees for today's session. Well, Chris, you've spoken a bit about some of the challenges that you may have seen as being part of a faculty member or having experience with, excuse me, with international students in the past. From our perspective, what we see is when students come to Canada, now this is all pre-COVID, when students were allowed to travel to Canada easier than what it is right now. Some of the biggest challenges were for students being able to adjust to the whole Canadian classroom. Students for someone who's always lived in Canada and is used to the norms of how a Canadian classroom works, for an international student, it's almost like relearning everything, and that in itself was challenging for our international students. As simple things as addressing professors. Some professors took it to heart when somebody called them sir or madam. They preferred first names, which some for certain cultures that's really not the norm. The other thing was around group settings that students had to learn within those classrooms, being part of a group where professors would go, hey, find yourself a group of 3 students or 4 students to be part of a group project. Students were not used to reaching out to other students, their peers, to ask them if they wanted to be part of a group. And so in that way, the students were left out, the international students were left out. So these were some of the initial challenges we noticed when students were coming to the college. The others were around making that social connection. Students really didn't know how to advocate for themselves, or didn't really know how to, again, reach out and make friends, network, which is pretty big in Canada, is around networking, whether it's within your classroom or if it's outside the classroom. And then the biggest piece that we see is immigration. Again, immigration, when we look at it, yes, everything is on the website, the immigration website, around what type of policies apply to students or not, or what type of permits you need or not. But it's not always very easy to find all of this information, and they're not always in very simple language, the way it's laid out. There's layers and layers of regulations that apply to one policy application for a certain permit. And so for international students that have already, where English is not their first language, that in itself is a big barrier. And so what we try to do from our end is to ensure that students get that support wherever they can with immigration. At the same time, we are trying our level best to connect with the support services at the college to ensure that students get that sort of that support, right? And in terms of networking or working in groups, or how to familiarize themselves with the whole Canadian classroom. So that was one of the biggest challenges that I've seen over my years working at George Brown College.
Thanks so much, Tenzing. I think, based on the visual we have up on the screen, you touched on a number of areas there that, I'm thinking the cross-cultural adjustment, the academic adjustments, and, even that idea of what does it mean to be an independent student or a post-secondary student in our educational system versus wherever it is they may have come from. These are things, as I said, to me that I only have so much perspective because I've only been educated in one space, in one place. So very enlightening to hear that. And Lynne, I'll pass it to you. Where do you see these sort of challenges, or maybe we could think of growing pains when it comes to that experience?
Thank you also for having me today. I would echo everything that Tenzing has said. I think we have similar experiences based on what he shared. The other thing I would say too is the international student journey to Canada has several stages or several milestones, right? So I think when we're having these conversations, we think a lot about when they're actually physically here and they're in our campus spaces, but recruitment and making a decision about what institution to select and what city you're to live in Canada. Canada is a very big country, like those are all important factors for international students as they're thinking about their journey to Canada. So not only are they thinking about navigating the new environment, they're thinking about navigating the new environment, not just about program of study or course selection or how to get around campus. They're trying to figure out how to navigate life in Canada, which can be quite daunting. It's a lot to think about, right? It's a lot to keep track of. Tenzing talked about the immigration regulations and that being top of mind for them when it comes to applying for their study permits. But then they also have to think about housing and accommodation, administrative responsibilities like banking and phone plans and how to get around the city. What does the transit system look like? And then once they figure that all out, they have to then, they're looking for community and they're looking to make friends. And so there's so many different layers. I think if you think of an onion, right, there's so many different layers that the student has to peel back in order to settle, to start to build a life here in Canada. And so our work is a lot of that. It's a lot of helping students understand not just how to navigate the post-secondary education system. Our work is also helping students, figure out life, which is a really big thing. I also want to touch on the educational system point that Tenzing brought up, because I think that's so key and so important. A lot of our students, if they didn't come to Canada and do a year or two of high school, maybe they're coming directly from their home country. And so they now have to learn to navigate a different educational system, a different way of teaching and learning and culture. And that can be quite confusing at first. I recall my first couple lectures when I was a student, and I was quite shocked at just the style of teaching, because it was not what I was used to when I was in high school in Barbados, right? So a lot of that are a lot of those things are different factors that the student has to consider. And although the one size fits all approach does not work at all in this work, I think it's a lot of getting to know students, getting to understand where they're coming from, what their context is, and then finding ways to support, whether that's kind of scaling up and reaching out to other campus partners and finding ways to collaborate across the institution to provide that support. But overall, I would say that despite the layers and despite the complexities of supporting students with the situations, our offices are very, I guess, well positioned and well poised to find ways to connect and help students navigate in the post-secondary landscape.
Thank you both for sharing that perspective. It leads me to wonder, based on your experiences in these roles, are there specific times that you tend to see the most need for these international students when they come? Like I would imagine maybe the first year experience period, the onboarding process, but do you notice different, like if we were gonna generalize at the risk of generalizing too much, but within sort of that 3 to 4 year undergraduate journey, for example, do you notice specific times where there are those biggest needs, whether it be, for administrative, academic, or personal support?
Mm-hmm. I would say Definitely at the beginning, for sure, because there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of just like learning that needs to happen. And I also think at the end, not to say that in the middle there's not support needed, there definitely is, but if you're thinking about rites of passage, right? Like the beginning is definitely a place of, you know, I don't really know what to do. I don't know how to navigate this. And the end is a little bit as well, because you're now transitioning out of a system and a life that you've known for the last 3 or 4 years to you're closing a chapter to start a new one. And so we do find that there is a bit more of a need to help students navigate what's happening for them at the end and that transition out of our institution.
Again, I think, you know, Lynn sort of hit the point in terms of where the support is mainly needed. But to add to that, I think it also depends on other factors, at least in my sort of experience, that are outside the control of the student. Something like the pandemic, you know, when it hit, for some students, it was right in between their terms, right? And so, you know, we had students who reached out to us while they were in their, you know, second year program of the program. And in colleges, normally diploma is very common, you know, 4 semesters, 2-year programs. And so, you know, we had quite a lot of students reach out to us when the pandemic hit, and with all kinds of, you know, inquiries and support. And so that's where, you know, when I mentioned about the environments, the other factors that do come into play. But yes, to, you know, to Lynn's point, I think, you know, we try and address most of the support that students need at the very beginning when they join, because really that's when we hope that they get all the information that they need in order to be successful in their program. And then towards the end, it's really about transitioning then to the next phase in their life, right? Which is probably, you know, finding a career in their field, or you know, sort of settling down in Canada. So yeah.
Thank you both for that. You know, one final thought, and you alluded to it just now, Tenzing, for those of us in the campus community who might not be as connected directly to international students, but so whether it be faculty, student services, student wellness, anyone else who's preparing potentially for these students being back on campus, maybe a couple final quick thoughts on this topic. What would be the main COVID-related issues that some of our international students might be facing, in addition to our domestic students, when getting back to the campus for the fall or for the winter, depending on what decision is made for those programs? Like 1 or 2 quick things that maybe we should all keep in mind for those of us who are touching their lives in some way this fall.
Yeah, that's a tricky one.
So, and just to allude to it, I was recently, within the last couple of days, a CBC article came out. I don't know if anyone here listening saw it, but it was specifically talking about things like visa backlogs, lack of potential vaccines available, quarantine measures, et cetera. I'm just wondering, from your perspectives, what are you guys preparing for, and what do you want the campus communities to prepare for in addition to what you are preparing for?
I mean, from a support service point of view, you know, we've sort of had to pivot when the pandemic hit. We had to do everything, move all of our programmings online. All of our support services had to be done through our online platforms. I think it's just getting used to again, I think there'll be a bigger adjustments for returning students that have done parts of their programs in person, and then, you know, had to do you know, in between their programs all online, or some of them may have gone back to their own home country and then recently re-entered. For them, it could be, I feel, a bigger adjustments academic wise, and maybe even accessing services, because they're initially used to the in-person services, whereas when we now go back to offering the in-person service whenever things get better in Ontario, it may not look the same. Right, so the experience, what they've had initially when they started the program, may not be the same when they return to campus. For the online learners, you know, that I've always learned, started the program online, you know, just not having that full sort of that services, that support that they need, that we could potentially offer had we been back to normal operations. That may play some part, because pre-COVID, we were all available on the campus. We were very accessible. It was easy to get hold of us, and that may not be the experience that these students may have when they do come to in-campus learning, right? So, but yeah, I don't know what else to add, Lynn. Maybe something you could help out with.
You know what? I think students are they're trying to figure out how to make a decision, and that decision, if they are not in the country, should I stay in my home country or should I come back at this point in time for the fall semester? And if a program is not online and is in person, then that's more clear cut. But if there's a little bit more of a gray area where we don't yet know whether that student's going to be required to be on campus in person, it kind of puts them in a really interesting situation, because the decision then rests with them about whether they should come or not. And then you think about trying to make that decision amidst all of the policy changes, the federal, provincial government policies, which some are in alignment and sometimes they're not, right? So it's a daunting and challenging task. And often the students will reach out to us and be like, what do I do? And, we can't tell a student what to do. And so often the advice is, here's the information. You need to make the best decision that supports you, that supports your well-being. But it is quite nerve-wracking, because a lot of students don't necessarily want to make the wrong decision when it comes to, traveling right now and getting here, and all the different hoops they have to jump through to get here. They have to do testing before. Now there's a new travel exemption for international students who are fully vaccinated. So that's now kind of been thrown into the mix in terms of the decisions and the factors that might impact the start of their academic year. The other thing to think about, and we've had these conversations as a team, is the fact that we have a whole cohort of students who have never been on our campus. So they spent their first year abroad, or just not physically in our campus spaces. So when we think about, returning to campus, we are going to be supporting a double cohort of students who have never accessed our spaces, who've never been in our offices, who never sat in our classrooms. And so I think it's really important to think about those things as university administrators, international educators, professors and staff in the classroom. Thinking about those things is going to be really important, because you're going to have a class of students who are looking to you to help them kind of, they're in their second year technically in the system, but in terms of their experience and how they engage with us, our programs, and in the classroom, they are their first year.
Those are very good points, and I think a very useful segue into now shifting to what it's like for those of you working in these departments doing this work. And I think my first question is, how are you guys doing? Have you been coping for yourselves and managing over the past, 15 months now, going on 16 months? Yeah. I mean, I have some questions for you about what's a day in the life like and all these things, but I first love to hear what's it been like as a team? Let's just mental health, wellness, coping, all of those things. How are you guys feeling?
I can start.
Yeah, go ahead.
It has been a struggle. It has been a struggle. I won't lie. I think definitely we have had to pivot and change, and often without notice, the way we have worked and the systems that we've created, and we've had to do a lot of reprioritizing. And so it is quite challenging, I think, as a team, to, like feel like, I think, Chris, in our conversations, we talked about, I use the analogy, I love to speak in analogies, and I use the analogy of sand and walking on sand, where it just feels like, and not the wet sand where it's firm, like the dry sand where the ground is shifting underneath you consistently. And I think that's the best analogy that I can use to explain what it's been like over the last little bit. Is we're still moving through it, because we are a team of people that care a lot and center the student experience, but it's really challenging, and it gets tiring. It gets very tiring. And so a lot of our conversations have been, and I love the name of this webinar for that reason, is there's no blueprint. There is no set way of how to do this work. No, at any level in the institution and the government, nobody really, we're all trying to figure out how this works as we go. And we have to be gracious with that knowledge, and compassionate to ourselves with that knowledge, because it can be quite challenging when you feel like, your best laid plans might not necessarily work out in the way that you want, because maybe a regulation changes at the drop of a hat, or a student is stuck abroad and you don't really know how to figure that out. So the student is stressed and you're stressed, and so it's been a challenge over the last 15 months, and it's been a lot of focusing on team and communication with students, communication with one another. It's been a lot of owning that we don't, like, if you don't know, it's okay, we'll figure out and we'll find a way. And it's been a lot of encouraging rest. So my team will tell you that I will often have conversations about, when are you taking your vacation days? You haven't taken time off in a while. Maybe you should have a short work week this week, So that's what it's been like the last 15 months.
Sounds like it's pretty welcome environment to work on your team, Lynne.
Yeah, I hope so.
Sure. I appreciate that. And what I'm hearing, if I was in one of those roles, it would be so hard for me to define if today's been a successful day. Like, have I made that impact? Have I done what I hope to achieve? And Tenzing, I'll pass it to you to add or augment to some of those thoughts.
I think Lynne summarized this really well. And I think what she's just mentioned, I think she speaks, on behalf of all the international, I think, departments across Canada. I think this is what I've experienced with the team that I work with. A great, I got to give it to my team, very resilient team members, the administrators that I work under. Like Lynne said, there was no blueprint for when the pandemic hit. Literally, we were almost 100% in-person type of services pre-COVID, and then having to switch remotely, thinking about, obviously the students. That was one of the first things that our team discussed about, is how do we connect with our students when we weren't available in person? How do we connect with students that are pursuing the studies from outside of Canada? Students facing, we dealt with all kinds of issues that I don't think we would have necessarily thought about. Simple things like Blackboard. These are more academic related platforms, but students were reaching out to us because we would sort of the first point of contact for these students. And so we were connecting with academic departments, IT, they're trying to see how we could figure out students from China trying to get access to their coursework on Blackboard, and that itself was another sort of project. The one thing that again, that apart from the whole business side of it, personally, it took a big hit for a lot of people, including myself and my team members. We had certain health issues within the team that we just didn't know how we could work around. So there were all these challenges that we faced, and it was almost again me. When I joined as the manager, it was just at right a month and a half before the pandemic hit, and the college services closed down. So I was literally I didn't know who to turn to at times, right? Because this was so new to me. But again, along the way, we figured this out as a team. And I said we had some really good backing from the administrators in terms of the type of platforms that we could purchase for things like students traveling to Canada. We made some, some financial expenses along the way, just so that we could support our students well, right? So, those are some of the things that helped us get through. And then, just 3 weeks before, the college was hit with a malware virus, and all of our IT systems were shut down. So, like Lynn said, I mean, it's just, when you think you've sort of gotten over the hump, there's another big mountain that just pops right in front of you, and you're trying to go, how do I now get over this bigger hump, right? So it's been a very stressful and challenging times for the team and for the college in general. But I like I said, I think we're just I don't know, just resilient. I think we know this is in front of us, barriers in front of us, and we know if we don't act on it, the students are just going to be in a worse situation. And so we've been just fighting through it along, and that's just what it's been like so far for us.
Yeah.
If I
Thank you so
can,
much. Oh, sorry,
if I
go
can
ahead, Lynn.
add to that, Chris,
Yeah,
Tenzin, you
absolutely.
reminded me of something. I think also it's been helpful for me to be able to reach out to other, managers in other international offices at other institutions to hear about their experiences and how they're working through things. So I think it's very important and a good reminder. So thanks, Tenzing. It's a good reminder that we're not doing this work alone. There's people who've been doing this work, who are doing this work, who are in the same boat because we're all bound by the same regulations. And so you may not know who that person is directly. You might not maybe even have a professional relationship with them. But if you go on the university website and you look up their contact information and you send an email, what I've seen is that people are they are responsive. They do want to have those conversations. They do want someone to, talk through things with, even if it's just to validate that this is tough, So I think that has been quite helpful when we were writing our readiness plans. We were all writing our readiness plans and trying to get them into the government so that we can get approval so our students can come to Canada. And what was helpful for us was reaching out to institutions, even institutions that we know had gotten approval when we hadn't yet, and just having them share, whether they shared their readiness plans or just what worked for them to get that approval. It was really helpful, because when you're sitting there and you're scratching your head, you're like, I don't know what else is needed here. It takes a toll mentally as well. And so I find finding community with other practitioners and support services across institutions outside of your own has been really helpful.
That's some very, very important advice. And, on the topic of what makes someone or a team resilient, it sounds like also overtly talking about these things, naming what's going on and labeling how we're feeling as a team is hugely valuable to sort of working through these times together. With that being said, I'd like to shift this back to kind of what I said at the beginning. For those people who have been in campus environments and not directly working in your domain and might have some ignorance, much like I do, around what actually occurs within the parameters of the International Student Support Centers, departments, teams, I'd love to just get, a high level walk through the life cycle, where it is you engage, where you sort of fit in the broader piece of the puzzle. For those of us who want to say, whenever I say the sentence to the student, hey, why don't you go check out the International Student Center? They can help you, so that I can learn, what exactly that means, what it doesn't mean, and where I can fit into that puzzle in the future. So Tenzing, if you don't mind, maybe starting us off, like, how would you describe exactly where you fit in the greater scheme of things?
I think Lynn touched a bit, where she mentioned there's all these kinds of different layers for an international student to go through. So similarly, I think I guess every college and institutes are set up slightly different. With George Brown, we have the recruitment team, the international recruitment team. We have an international admissions and enrollment team, and then we have the international student support team. And then all the other support services that are open more towards all domestic and international. My team is the International Student Integration and Support. So technically, my team, which comprises of a group of international student advisors and a few integration officers, are there for the current students that have already registered and are part of the and are studying and are part of the program. But when you look at a bigger picture, there isn't a fine line as to when the recruitment would solely deal with the students and then they would pass on to either the admissions team or then down to the support team. It's more, I think at this point where we're at is more of a gray area in terms of where we jump in, because we had situations where students are interested in the program, but they want to know more about the immigration aspect of it. Can they get a certain permit after they've applied for this program and completed? And our recruiters aren't necessarily certified to provide that immigration support. And so they would ask us to support, or there would be a recruitment drive at the college, and our team would be asked to jump in to see if there's any inquiries around the type of supports that these students could get once they come to George Brown. But if you look slowly at where we are supposed to jump in, it's really when students have joined the college, have started the program, and that's when we get involved. Now, Chris, you've just touched on, when and an experience that you've just shared, where as soon as you hear the word international, you're sort of sending them off to the international center. And this isn't, and this isn't, again, a very rare occurrence. It does happen quite often than as anyone could imagine happening at the college. I want to share a small experience that I've had when I was an advisor at one of the campuses. It tends to, the days that I go up twice a week to that particular campus, it does get very busy. And so I have lineups for an hour, like students waiting in just to see me, and so it'll be an hour wait. And when I finally meet the student, they talk about admission to the college, and I say, fine, I'm just going to support the student because this is a potential international student coming to the college. And then when I ask them about the permits that they have, this person tells me that they are actually permanent resident, but their prior educational experience was all outside of Canada. And then when I sort of dig in more into how they actually got into my office, is they just mentioned to the front counter that they wanted to know about how to transfer credits from an international education experience. And so that's when, we've started to communicate to different areas within the college around, the fact that you really do need to sit down and listen to the type of questions, or maybe probe more questions when a student is asking for help. It may not necessarily be that my team has the expertise in supporting that particular student or the inquiry, and it's an ongoing issue. I think we've gotten way better than we were. I think during the pandemic we've gotten even better, because everybody's sort of on Microsoft Teams, and everybody has groups. So it's been a lot easier to connect and find out, hey, we have this particular student, who would be the best support, rather than sending somebody off in person and that person waiting an hour sometimes just to speak to us, and then finding out later that we aren't really the area that supports that particular inquiry. So that's again just the ongoing, I guess, challenges that we've had, and we're still working on it. I don't think we'll perfect it, because it really depends on who the student speaks to first, right? So it's more education on our piece to the different areas, academic and non-academic areas, just letting them know that, hey, you just gotta probe more questions to the student instead of just directing them directly to the international.
Yeah, thank you so much. To potentially augment that, Lynne, where would you say the areas where you're responsible or can indeed provide the most assistance, and maybe what are those times that you guys feel most frustrated or challenged when someone comes in, you're like, oh, like, how did this happen again, kind of thing? What would you say is sort of common to that experience?
An excellent question. I would say in terms of challenges, I think the way I prefer to think about them at this point is like, what opportunity is this presenting for us to educate our campus partners about what international students are experiencing or have to consider. So an example I can give is, programs with experiential learning or work integrated learning opportunities. Is the program aware of the additional documentation that student will need, the timing of when the student will need that documentation in order to participate in those learning experiences? And so those are the areas where our team can support through advising, through consulting with our partners, through coming in and running workshops, and just so that there's a more fulsome picture, so that faculty partners can plan and create processes that support the student. So it's less of, the student having to kind of dance around and walk through all this different red tape, and the program actually thinking intentionally, okay, this is what we're requiring of students. This is what we know international students will have to do in order to participate in this. We want them to be able to participate in this. So how do we create opportunities for them to do so seamlessly, knowing that there's additional considerations that I have to make? So it has been a challenge, I would say, for sure, especially with programs maybe that historically have not had international students enrolled in the program, but now are seeing that. And so they have to think a lot about reframing and reimagining how they're informing the international students about what they need to do before they can participate in certain things. So I would say that has been, for sure, that's been a challenge.
Awesome. Thank you. It sounds really useful, pragmatic information to share with those of us listening who, once again, would sort of interact with but not be exactly sure how best to integrate with your services. Just want to move on here. So one of the conversations the three of us had early on when we were planning this webinar was sort of the progression of potential needs and support we've seen with our international student populations. And a lot of this is very relevant to, I think, campus members who are in, student wellness services that maybe are going to be preparing for more requests for help, more assistance. And so one thing we talked about, if we take ourselves back to March of 2020, and you guys have both alluded to it, this initial thing was shifting everything online, and the very pragmatic question the students had was, should I stay or should I go home? And then we had this really interesting discussion, and maybe you can sort of take the reins here and share. I just sort of put by, a few months into the pandemic, there started to become more salient needs identified. And I think, Lynne, you mentioned these very, very important things around students asking more and more for financial support options, job searching support, housing solutions, adapting to learning online. How has that been going since last summer? And what have you noticed sort of has been the progression of that?
Yeah, I would say it was quite interesting to see. So just for context, last summer we sent out 2 separate surveys, one at the beginning of the summer, maybe closer to spring, to ask students not just where they were, but what support do you need? What are the challenges that you're experiencing? And our response rate was about 11%, so it wasn't awesome. But what we heard was financial support, job search support, online learning. Then we sent out a second survey at the end of the summer. We had a much higher response rate. It was more than doubled. And then the progression was well-being, community, healthcare, wanting to know that they had access to healthcare when they did eventually decide to travel to Canada, mental health resources, so connection to counseling on campus, support for navigating the online learning environment, specifically asynchronous learning, because the time learning and being in a classroom in a different time zone, we were hearing was quite challenging for a lot of students. And financial support was a common thread that ran through both of them. So with that in mind and hearing about the progression in the needs of the students, it helped inform what we focused on for our programming for the upcoming year. So we focused a lot more on our community building programming. So online, all virtual, obviously, but online peer socials. We strengthened our social media presence. So it wasn't just about info sharing anymore or updates on programming. It was sharing encouragement and positive messages through our social media as well, because students were struggling. And so thinking about those things was really important for us when it came to our programming. We did more collaboration with our career center, a lot of wellness programming with counseling, as well as athletics and recreation. And for us, so Tenzing talked a little bit about the structure and where they all sit at George Brown, but at Ryerson, our office we fall under the division of the Office of the Vice Provost of Students, specifically under Student Affairs. But within our unit, we are direct colleagues to learning support, campus engagement, so like the orientation team and try mentoring programs, so a lot of peer-to-peer mentorship support. And so there was I would say a very concerted effort to collaborate with our learning support team to run workshops, not just on study skills, but what we heard from students was, having challenges with motivation. So we thought about what it would look like to provide workshops and areas of support for students to address some of those challenges that they voiced. So that was last year. This year, we're continuing our planning and thinking about what it looks like to provide a hybrid of virtual and in-person, as well as some in-person programming, like thinking about planning for all three of those scenarios and what it might look like. Still with the understanding and the knowledge that it is important for us to help students feel connected, to find community, to cultivate some sort of sense of belonging and connection to the campus and to Toronto even, right? So we're still thinking, and we're still trying to formulate and plan and communicate with students and hear from them about what is valuable to them, how they want to engage with us even. Like we're asking, do you prefer your appointments online? Do you prefer them in person? Just so we have an idea of how to organize and coordinate our programs for the upcoming year.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And Tenzing, I know in our previous planning discussions, there was further to these points. Historically, we've seen underutilization of a lot of student wellness services by our international students, whether it be counseling or accessibility service and so on. I'm wondering if, based on these identified needs and maybe what's been going on in your world, would you anticipate the student wellness services being more desirably engaged with by our international student populations? Is there going to be more of a focus to build that bridge to like integrate those services and make them more appealing? What are your thoughts on that?
I think, again, this is pre-COVID. We made a good headway into educating, I think, students around the different types of services, especially around counseling and the accessibility learning services that we have at the college. The numbers were okay in terms of the students, international students accessing the services. We actually, especially with counseling, we ensured that we had a dedicated counselor that was able to speak to our international students. The counselor would also run, group sessions, obviously do the one-on-one counseling sessions as well, but try and be, more accessible to students, because counseling, that word in itself, for certain cultures, that's a big stigma, right? For our international students. And so not only a fact that, that it's looked very differently depending on the background and the culture that students coming from, but also the fact that there is a big stigma around if the students identify themselves as having access a certain counseling or an accessibility learning services, that it could potentially impact their immigration status in Canada. And so these could be, factors in maybe not having our international students access these services as much as we would like them to, when they actually do need that type of services, right? So those are some of the ongoing challenges that I'm sure most colleges and universities face as well. It's getting these students to the door, right, to the counseling door or the accessible learning services door. When the pandemic hit, I apologize. I think my chair is kind of squeaky, uh, so you may hear some
No
background
problem.
noise. Um, uh, I think when the pandemic hit, I think a lot of these services in the colleges too. And again, this is just from a personal perspective. I really don't have the more in-depth sort of the workings of how the other services are managing, their programming within the college. But I feel like everybody was just working overtime, kind of, right? They were I'm sure with the counseling and the accessible learning services, they were probably getting a lot of inquiries from the entire student community around support, and we weren't able to sort of pivot that aspect of that service, what we had pre-COVID, to the remote service that's happening right now with the college, at least from the international and the counseling sort of partnership that we had. And that's one of the things that I think we me and being the manager and then reaching out to the counseling area and trying to figure out how we could move along and try and reintroduce some of these things that we were doing pre-COVID, right? So those are the things that's there. I don't know. Sorry, what else did you want me to talk on?
No, you summarized it well, and actually, I think it's a great time. There's a question in the chat from a member of the community who works with international students that are having significant mental health concerns, and the comment there is that the international office at their institution has been very helpful in being part of support for these students, particularly regarding a disconnect being experienced by the student with the family in the home country regarding mental health as being a legitimate concern, which we know is common depending on where the student's coming from, or maybe less common from another area. However, the question is, do you have any thoughts on this one, or suggestions for maybe a way to keep building that bridge or improve that support when there is that circumstance?
I mean, that's a hard one.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not something that we see very often, but definitely, every now and then, I am sort of made aware of situations where students have faced certain mental health issues, but the student does not want to sort of um, get their families involved, and it becomes a little bit more challenging for us, because we know a lot of the families are now worried, because they've lost contact with their child or with their guardian, and they want to know what are we doing in order to support the particular student, right? So it's there's so much we can do from our end. Obviously we are also guided by confidentiality and privacy policies that we have at the college. There's also other laws and around the government policies and laws that may also impact the way we do our work around certain these type of situations. It's again, we just have to go with just talking to the student. I mean, if it's a safety issue, yes, we don't really need the student's consent. If we feel that the student is probably in a situation where there may be some self-harm involved, we'd have to get the families involved. But in areas where where the student just doesn't want to disclose this or does not want to include their families, and it gets very difficult for us. And again, we have a very good team of counselors and accessible learning consultants that are out there that are trying to their level best to ensure that the support is there for the students.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to add to that, I think maybe it's also to normalize conversations around mental health for the student in general. And I saw there was another question about the stigma and access to counseling. And yeah, I think it's normalizing these conversations for sure for the students. and asking them how best they want to navigate this, because they might not want to include their family members in the conversation, or they might, but that's the choice that they have, right? The privacy concerns are very real. And I think these issues I think have been compounded by COVID-19, because they're home, and they're engaging with maybe their family members around, and some students are hesitant to have a conversation with an international student advisor or counselor, with the knowledge that maybe a parent or another family member could be listening and hearing what the conversation is. So it does present quite a bit of a challenge, but I think it's important to continue to provide these supports, these services, normalize these conversations around mental health being important, and talking about it and seeking out support, asking for help, talking about what it means to ask for help. What does it mean to ask for help for you in your own cultural context versus, like what you know about, versus, like what maybe you've seen if you've come to Canada, right? Like in your time on campus. So it is quite tricky, and it is quite challenging at times. I don't know if I have any innovative strategies, just looking at the question. But I think when it comes to kind of reducing stigma, in my mind, a big part of that is normalizing the conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like you very eloquently put the student at the center of being the expert of their own experience and giving them that space to tell us what they need in that moment.
Definitely.
And, I know we were about to go live on the webinar about how this is going to go with this. And we're already at 1:57. I want to get through a couple more things quickly before we wrap up. So, I think this summarizes a lot of what we were just talking about. And actually, Lynne, this is actually one of your quotes from when we were doing our planning discussions. I don't know if you could tell, but this whole idea of supporting cannot just fall under one office. It really does take a village, and we don't have all the answers. The one thing I want to make sure we ask both of you, and maybe you can try answering this in one sentence each, and it'll be more of a stream of consciousness. First thing that comes to mind is, what's keeping you up at night when you think about sort of the next steps and what your role is on the campus moving forward? I'm sure there's more than one thing, but what's the first thing that comes to mind, Tenzing?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask Lynne first. Waiting to hear what Lynne has to say.
I saw you sitting back waiting for this one.
What keeps me up at night? I think the fact that that I'm me or my team, we're not available 24/7. I think that and given this current times, we've had situations where students are stuck at a transit airport and are not able to fly to Canada because the airlines wouldn't allow them to fly, and they need a document from the school, and so happens that the time that they need the document, it's off office hours. And the morning that I wake up, something that happened earlier today as well, is a flurry of messages from everybody, from the student to other staff members in the college, saying, hey, we've got this issue, we got to fix it. And so that's probably, I mean, I'm sure there's more, but that's the first thing that just came to my mind, because it's just so recent, having to be there for students. And I can sort of feel what these students are going through, being in a new country, a very totally, new environment, stuck in an airport, wanting to get certain documents so they could fly to Canada, and not sort of getting any responses, right? And so that probably is something that I think about quite often. But at the same time, I mean, we're very bound by the limited resources we have. Unfortunately, we're not able to be there 24/7, and so that's where I think we rely a lot on our college community, the departments in the college to help us and sort of support us in providing support to international students. So yeah, sorry, it was more than a line, but
No
that just
worries. Thank
came
you
to
for
my mind right
sharing.
now.
Lynn, what about you?
I mean, the short answer is most things. But no, I think for me, it's a little bit related to, what have we thought of? What have we not thought of? What are the scenarios that, we are anticipating, and have we figured out a process that is student-centered that will support the students as they try to figure all of this out. So thinking about that, but then coupled with that, knowing how much time, energy, effort, brain power that goes into that. I think about my team and think about what else am I going to ask them to do, and how are they feeling, and how's a recent conversation we had was about compassion fatigue as a team. And one of my colleagues, she posed a question. She's like, how's your empathy meter? So like, I think about that a lot. Like for my team, my team is filled with empathetic individuals. And so asking that question of like, where are their empathy meters at this point? Those are the questions for sure that keep me up.
Thank you so much to both of you for sharing that. I had these ambitions of talking more about internationalization and things that are coming back into focus, and I've realized we've run out of time. So to me, that necessitates the planning for potentially a phase 2 of talking about these topics, because I think they're just becoming increasingly important. But I did want to take a moment to, with the last minute we have left, to genuinely thank both of you for being involved in planning these discussions and talking about how diverse the area of international student support is, and how much of a student's life you guys touch, and working together with other parts of the campus to sort of make this experience as meaningful and impactful as possible for the students, and for them to go back home and tell other people about what a great experience it is to come to educate yourself in a Canadian or post-secondary campus. So I really appreciate the perspective, the honest sharing, and I think for those of us that have been listening, it's been very illuminating to understand more about what it's like to walk a mile in your shoes. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
I just muted myself accidentally there. To the audience, thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to restarting the new series of webinars in September. So enjoy the summer to everyone, and stay safe, and I hope to see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.